And welcome in. Late Kick is live. It is Sunday night, August 21st, the year of our Lord 2022, the show where it kind of all begins again. If you have never watched this show, if you're a Pate State veteran, regardless, this is the show for you. If you don't have a college football show to call your own, if you feel like the national college football media has kind of left you behind, this is the show for you. If you don't watch college football, if you're totally new to the game or you've watched it your entire life, doesn't matter. Tonight, this show is for you. Whether you know the show or not, it's for you. We've got full predictions. We will have a record projection for every Power 5 team in this great country of ours by the end of this show tonight. You will know our conference champion prediction. You will know our playoff prediction. You'll know our national champion for this college football season before we go off the air tonight. I've got camp whispers and intel from 8 or 9 programs from all across the country. We got quarterback moves being made. We've got injury intel to get to you. The Ramen Noodle Express leaves the station for week 1 tonight. We've got 4 best bets on games that are still 2 weeks away. We're doing all that as they watch us in Waverly, Tennessee, in Clovis, New Mexico. College Station, Texas is tuned in, even though I'm told some of you out there pull for Bowling Green, albeit in College Station, and Fayetteville, North Carolina. Hey, buckle up. It's going to be the longest show we've ever done. It's the most jam-packed show we've ever done. It was a big undertaking, but the team pulled it off. Now it's just up to me to execute. First things first, let's dive into some SEC scrimmage intel because there's a lot going on down here, and then I'm going to expand it nationally in just a second to keep you up to date on. Before we even get into predictions, I got to update you on Alabama. We've been watching that wide receiver group. A lot of people nationally are looking at that wide receiver group if you're trying to nitpick and saying, "Ooh, I don't recognize a lot of those names." Well, number 11 here, Treyshawn Holden's a perfect example of names that you probably remember if you follow recruiting hardcore, and you've seen him pop on the screen a time or two for Alabama, but he hasn't been, as of yet, a Jalen Waddle or a Devontae Smith. Well, it sounds like his time has arrived. They had a scrimmage there in Tuscaloosa yesterday. He had 3 touchdowns. They were all over 50 yards, so they were the explosive play variety. He is a guy. He's never been a weakness. It's never anything like that. It's just sometimes you got to wait your turn when you're at Alabama, and if you don't immediately, as a true freshman, folks can forget about you. Well, Treyshawn Holden was decent as a true freshman, but he's one, along with Jermaine Burton and Ja'Cory Brooks, I don't call Brooks a veteran, but the more established presence is there. He's the next guy that it sounds like is ready to pop, along with freshmen like Kobe Prentice. Isaiah Bond is probably the fastest out of that whole group. I'm looking forward to watching them. You know what we don't really talk about a lot with Bama, we know we talk about them a lot, but we don't talk so much about the fact that they may have the best 1-2 combo at running back in the country if Jace McClellan is healthy and 90+% of what we know he's capable of, because they got Jahmyr Gibbs there at RB1. So, man, they're going to be really good this year. How good? We'll see. We're going to predict them later in the show. Texas A&M. I want to address something with A&M. There's some conflicting intel from Texas A&M. I'm talking even about some folks who watch the same scrimmage and come away thinking different things. You got some folks who say, "Ooh, this offense still feels kind of herky-jerky. Haynes King throwing 1 too many interceptions for me at practice today." I don't think folks understand how good they are defensively, how deep they are defensively. And I don't think you get how hard it is to scrimmage when you got a number of your premier playmakers out that you will have on Saturdays in the fall. Here's what I think I know about A&M. Number 1, they're going to be better offensively. How much better is a valid question. I think Haynes King is your guy at quarterback. Does he sustain that the whole year? That's a valid question. I think that some players being out in these scrimmages, along with increasing amounts of depth up front defensively, have sort of thrown perception out of whack. They're not facing themselves. It's not maroon on white come Saturday in the fall. You're facing Miami. You're facing Mississippi State, in which case it still will kind of be maroon on white. You get the picture, though. This happens sometimes when teams are elevating from good to either very good or good to eventually great. Sometimes even the local fans don't really understand what they're watching. I've seen this with Georgia. Georgia just won a national championship. And sometimes I would listen to scrimmage intel and I would listen to practice reports, and you don't know how to properly gauge it because you don't know how good each side of the ball is and how one side of the ball is impacting the other. A&M's going to be fine. Are they going to be good enough offensively to win the West? I don't know. That's what we made the segments later in the show for. But I think Haynes King's going to be just fine. I think you will see increase in the explosivity rate offensively this year. I just think it's going to kind of be a work in progress. That doesn't mean Connor Wegman couldn't make a move. That's just because he's that good. I don't think it's going to be because King's a weakness. So let's take everything that we hear from College Station and let's try and run it through the proper filter. I humbly ask that. What about Georgia? They just won a national championship. You know, if you've been watching Late Kick, we hadn't really been focused on the quarterback talk a lot of people do nationally because we know who it is and we know who he is in Stetson Bennett. I am very fascinated and have been for a few weeks now at the number 2 corner position opposite Keely Ringo. And it sounds like Kamari Lassiter has just locked that thing up. Now, that's who we expected to lock that position up, but it is sort of comforting, given all indications that we've gotten out of Athens, that he's done it with a couple of weeks to go before they play Oregon, because now you can start to domino your way through the rest of that secondary, and you can start to build out your depth, and you can start to get guys the appropriate amount of reps and practice. I'm not telling Kirby Smart anything he doesn't know, but I think sometimes when you're watching this, you think to yourself, oh, it doesn't matter when they figure it out, just as long as they figure it out. Oh, it matters. You want to get that thing figured out as quickly as possible because of that rep situation. They don't let you practice 4 hours a day, guys. They give you a very, very fine window in which you can practice. And so Kamari Lassiter, that's really good news. That's really good news because of, number one, what I just stated. Number two, it's a good thing that Georgia's figuring out their corner rotation because there is going to be, how shall I put this, an increased emphasis on the importance of that position for Georgia this year. When you lose a bunch of guys to the NFL at the positions they lost them, now that doesn't mean woe is me next year. It may mean you got to win a different way, and I think that's valid for Georgia, but they lost so much defensive front talent, generational talent, to the NFL that positions like last year that you may have been able to hide guys at, I'm thinking of Darian Kendrick, for example, this year could be put under more of a microscope. And so if I've got Ringo there and I've got a Kamari Lassiter who is taking the position by the throat and can improve week by week, and then I got guys on the back end like a number of them, Stokes not the least of which, could grow into starting roles at some point during this year, that's a good thing. Georgia's secondary is going to be tested a lot more this year than it was last year. They need those guys. This is a big headline for them. Florida, this is not going to be really big hidden news. I just don't know that folks really understand how big it is. Anthony Richardson's a really good football player. That you know. He's a starting quarterback at Florida. Any of you who got a taste of him last year, you probably looked and you said, boy, that guy's got a lot of potential. That number 15 there, I don't care what his nickname is. He's got a lot of potential. He is on the fringe of the Heisman odds when you're, looking on YouTube right now, if you're looking at the chart there. I'm not so much focused on that. I don't think he has the talent around him at receiver to propel himself into that conversation. But I do think he is a talent, and this is being echoed by everyone. I mean, everyone around the Florida program. He's the kind of talent that can change the outcome of multiple games for them this year. Now, they got to be close, so they can't be turning the ball over 4 times, and that's on him as well as others. But he's the kind of guy, he's the fall forward kind of guy. He's the kind of broken play, by any means necessary, make it happen kind of guy. A few times a game that you remember Auburn having in 2010. This is not the Cam Newton comparison thing, so save the individual clips that make it sound like that. But the Cam Newton effect was that around him, that Auburn offense was not much to write home about. But he single-handedly took them and drugged them to a national championship. I don't expect Florida to make it that far this year, but I do expect them to win some games that when the dust settles, you look at 15 and say, he drugged that team to a win this afternoon. That's incredible what he just did. Anthony Richardson, you keep him healthy, which, guys his size tend to do more frequently than smaller guys. I think he can do some very special things this year. And it's something that you've read in preview magazines and maybe your own eyeballs have told you. It's being validated so far throughout fall camp. That's the important part. Last but not least here in the SEC, sounds at Auburn like Brian Harson's ready to name a starting quarterback. I got to go on record as saying this one has not gone the way that I necessarily expected it to go. I thought Zach Calzada was going to be more of a factor here, and he may be later in the year, but it's just not the case now. In fact, he's probably the third option for them. TJ Finley sounds, for all intents and purposes, like he's locked up this quarterback position, and it's so imperative because, it's the quarterback position, but also there is no team in America, especially in the SEC, that needs a fast start more than Auburn, because that over-under win total is 6 for a reason. They are deficient in some areas, but their schedule gives them a chance. It gives them a lot of runway. They got 2 what should be layup games to start the year in Mercer and San Jose State. And then the next 3 are losable games, but they're also winnable games. These won't be big point spreads either way, and all 3 of them, Penn State, Missouri, LSU, back to back to back, they're all in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Which begs the question, what kind of quarterback play are you getting? Auburn's going to be good enough. Their overall just sheer talent roster, while not top 5 or top 10, is still plenty good enough to hang in every one of these games. They've got to basically play an SEC version of Iowa football. And for those of you who've watched Iowa, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you who've watched Auburn last year, you know they're fully capable of it. Now, what I wonder is there any added pop? Does TJ Finley give you any added pop? Because they're saying all the right things about him down there, but when do you not say all the right things? You don't name a starting quarterback and then say, we're going to have to win in spite of him, though. You know I just named him my starter, but he leaves a lot to be desired. Of course you don't say that, but yet that's how I felt when I watch him play at times last year. So I'm very interested because they, obviously as a coaching staff, have either seen enough from him that he is improved enough to lead them, or there's that B scenario, which we don't want to entertain, and that's just he's the starter because of lack of options. So let's just cross our fingers because we've got an over win total bet on Auburn. So let's cross our fingers and hope that's the case. I do wonder with Zach Calzada, that's a guy who was injured, didn't get spring. So I guess it's not the craziest thing to imagine that he couldn't come right in a new program, absent spring ball, and lock down a starting job. I wonder, once they get into the season, because we know it'll get rocky eventually. It even gets rocky for the eventual championship teams. If it gets rocky for them and they lose a couple of games, is it just TJ Finley wire to wire? Or week over week in practice, do we see Zach Calzada get healthier and healthier, and do we see him maybe make a move? Is Robbie Ashford a guy making a move? I keep leaving him out irresponsibly because he'd be the one probably taking starting reps right now if it weren't for TJ Finley. So that's an update from around the SEC. I want to tell you what kind of weekend we just had. A really big one. Thursday, I did something for only the second time in the history of the show. Our partners at Academy Sports and Outdoors, they said, we got a brand new store opening in Virginia. First one in the state of Virginia. Do your thing. Those were the words from Academy. Do your thing. It's very professional. I don't expect everyone to understand that kind of executive talk, but they said, do your thing. And I told you, we're putting Chalice of Supremacy on the line. That is the plural of chalice, regardless of what the comment section says. That's the plural of chalice. And that is this fancy little glass figurine here. And I said, if you prove to me that you go to that Richmond, Virginia Academy grand opening, you're in the running to win a chalice. Well, we're sending half a dozen of them because we had, I probably think hundreds of you, dozens and dozens and dozens. I still haven't opened all of them, but we had probably hundreds of you check in from the Richmond, Virginia Academy. Now, I'm going to have to wait until later in the week to see if they broke the record that we also set when they opened one in Panama City a few weeks ago. We got that record. Did we break our own record for traffic for an Academy Sports and Outdoors grand opening? We'll see. But I appreciate that. Also, for the record, Austin, Hunter, Tyler, I hadn't forgotten about you. We're back ordered on Chalice of Supremacy right now. So when I get 30 of them in, I've got them being shipped here right now, we've got a bunch to send out. Thank you so much for that. It is about the millionth time that you have taken a call to action and you've delivered above and beyond. That's why Academy Sports and Outdoors is our exclusive provider, and that's why they're banging on the door, constantly wanting to do more and more with the show. So from them, through me, to you, thank you guys so much for that. You know what tonight's show is about? A lot of things. But tonight's show is our official season prediction show. And so over, I don't know how long it's going to take, but we don't have a hard out tonight. And so as long as it takes, we're going to go through all the Power 5 conferences. I'm not going to hang on any one team for a long time, but we're going to go through these conferences. I'm going to single out some teams, and I'm going to go a little bit more in depth, but I'm going to give you record predictions for every team in these conferences. We're going to go conference championship matchups. We're going to go winners. I'm going to eventually give you playoff picks. We've got more camp whispers and intel coming up, and we got some best bets coming up too. So I know the clock says 7:15 Central. We haven't really even scratched the surface of the show. Big Ten prediction time. We're going to go first in the East and then in the West, and here's what I'm going to do. The first thing I want to do is I want to look at the overall division settings, and I want to take a look at who's favored, because a lot of times that matters, but in the Big Ten last year it didn't. Ohio State, man, they were the overwhelming favorite, just like they are this year, but it was Michigan that ended up taking home the belt last year. We remember that. We were at the Ohio State-Michigan game. Look at the odds here. Ohio State, a minus 250 money line favorite right now. to take the Big Ten overall. These are overall conference standings. So here's what we're going to do. Let's start in the East. I'm going to go in no particular order here. In fact, what I'm going to do as we look at the Big Ten Eastern Division title odds, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Michigan State, I'm going to just go on the clapper system. And we have what in production is called the VOG, or the voice of God, which is a voice that just comes from the netherworld. And randomly, we're going to pick some teams, and I'm going to give you my immediate breakdown. I'm going to give you a best case, worst case, and our actual model record projection. Let's see if this works.
First team in the East, Penn State.
Penn State. All right, the Fighting Jessies of Penn State. If you believe it or not, that is Jesse. Penn State's a really good team, guys. Keep on getting a lot of emotion when folks talk to me about Penn State. They keep on going about the 11-11 over the last 2 years, and they keep on talking about Sean Clifford, and it's never stat-driven. It's just either he's really good or he's terrible, and here's the reality. This is a really good talent roster. Sean Clifford is a good quarterback. I didn't say great. I didn't say elite. I didn't say Heisman contender. I said he's plenty good enough to win just about every game they play. They get their toughest win at home against Ohio State. Their over-under preseason win total is 8.5. Okay? So as we dive in here a little bit, their transfers are so vital. A lot of folks are talking about Clifford and whatnot. They've got a big-time wide receiver in Tinsley that's come in. They need him to hit. They've got offensive line help from Cornell, no less, that needs to hit. They got an edge guy coming in. They need those to hit. They, as a staff, believe they will hit. Take a look at their schedule. It's really interesting because they start off a lot the same way they did last year. 2 of their first 3 games are very losable, very treacherous, at Purdue, at Auburn. They're both on the road. I'm going to show you what our model thinks about this team. I'm going to go best case, worst case, and most likely. The best case for Penn State, because of how experienced you are at quarterback, and also because of the overall level of talent they have, and I think they really did a good job in the transfer market, is I think the best case for Penn State is an 11-1 season. In fact, our model in some of the scenarios, if we simulate the season 100 times, spits out an 11-1. The worst case here, which we've seen play out a time or two over the past few seasons with Penn State, is 7-5. That probably involves injury, as is the case most of the time when you go worst case. But our actual prediction for Penn State this year is 9-3. How close does that get you to contending in the Big Ten? We'll see. Think that went well? Yeah? Good pace. All right, next up.
Next team, Michigan.
The Michigan Wolverines. So I've taken a lot of flack for Michigan. I'm going to say for Michigan. Over Michigan is what I've taken a lot of flack for. I'm a huge believer in Michigan this year. We got them rated the 4th best team in the country. We would favor this team against last year's team if they played today. So that's how high I am on them. Everyone wants to talk about who you lose, and with good reason. Michigan lost some really good players, but that over-under win total sits at 9.5. Number one, because they got a lot of good ones coming back, and number two, it's a very workable schedule. You know, you can paint yourself a lot of paths for them to be right there in the thick of that Big Ten championship race. So while everyone else is a who have they lost camp, I'm sort of a camp of who do they have. And what they've got is a really enviable position at quarterback, twofold. Ditto at the running back position. This is the deepest and best wide receiver stable they've had. You know what they are on the offensive line. You know what their identity is offensively. And I say that even as they've lost an offensive coordinator. They promoted from within for a reason. They knew they didn't have to go anywhere. They had everything they needed right here in-house. Could be one of the sneakiest, best offenses in the country this year. And that defense, while they've lost some big names, this is not the first time they've had to replace premier NFL departures up front. They'll do it again. They'll be fine. And this is a team that, if they need to, will be able to outscore someone a time or two this year. Let's take a look at the best, worst, and most likely record scenarios for Michigan this year. Our best case is actually 12-0. We have a couple of paths here. They beat Ohio State last year. It is not out of this world insane to say that if that same identity faces that same identity with Ohio State again this year and there is an improvement on the Buckeye side of the fence, it may not matter which facility that game is played in. That's not the most likely. That's the best case. The worst case is 9-3, which is very, very crazy, I know, because the actual Vegas win total is 9.5. But I'm just telling you what the model spits out. It's extremely high on Michigan. So there aren't a lot of 7 and 8 win type scenarios in there. It's 9-3. You're looking at the schedule right now. They start off with a really long runway. That's no disrespect to Colorado State or Maryland. It's just a really long runway. But that heart of the schedule, when they go at Iowa and then they got Penn State a couple of weeks later, looking really forward to that. What is our prediction for Michigan? Our official prediction for Michigan, our fourth highest rated team in the JP poll, is 11-1. Michigan is going to be right in the thick of the Big Ten championship picture. As a result of that record, and that's just regular season at 11-1, they will be right there in the thick of the college football playoff picture until the finish line, just like they were last year. Next up, when are we going to do Ohio State? Are we doing Ohio State?
Let's go to Michigan's rival.
Ohio State.
Ohio State.
Okay, this is it. This is it. I feel like the draft in here. Okay, so Ryan Day rolls into Big Ten Media Days a couple of weeks ago, and he talks about how big a failure last year was. And he didn't crack a smile. And I know if you read the transcript, you may have thought, oh, that's a little tongue-in-cheek. It's not. It's not if you make your goals to win that game against Michigan, to go on and win the Big Ten championship game, and to win the national championship. They were 0-3 last year. So a lot of accolades, a lot of big fancy statistical numbers, but they didn't ultimately accomplish any of the things they wanted to. The good news is they returned a whole lot of those pieces, and they went and made definitive upgrades defensively. And I'm talking about from a staff perspective. Defensively, there are a lot of guys, a lot of really talented guys that as individuals have not maximized their potential for Ohio State because they hadn't been put in the best position to. Jim Knowles and his staff will change that. I don't know how long it'll take, but I imagine a lot of it's happening right now. The entire mood around this team is exactly where it needs to be. You can feel it. You don't have to be in Columbus, Ohio to feel that. I think they've got an underrated, tough schedule. By Big Ten standards, I know it may get laughed at outside of the Big Ten. They play 6 games that we have rated 7 or higher on the difficulty scale. Notre Dame's one of them. I know they're favored big, but that's not an easy opponent to start off with. They've got Wisconsin at home. They go to Michigan State, Iowa at Penn State, Michigan at home. There are some stiff opponents here. It's no one that they shouldn't be able to handle. But because of that, and I'll get to record projections in just a second, I'm going to tell you this is not some shoe-in 12-0 regular season team. I do want to point out that if they do fail to meet expectations this year, it will be one of the biggest wastes of premier offensive talent over a 2-year span that you will have seen. You don't want to put yourself in position where you know you had that wideout talent, you know you had that quarterback talent, and by your standards, you don't have a thing to show for it. That's the kind of competitive pressure that's on Ohio State this year. Let's take a look at the record projections. Best, worst, and most likely via our wonderful model here. The best case for Ohio State's always 12-0. There's always an undefeated path in the cards for the Buckeyes. Worst case, 9-3. Same worst case record as Michigan, by the way. This would involve their overall level of physicality not rising to the level it needs to be. This would include them kind of being diced against the likes of Michigan on the ground and being pushed around and put on skates. They have no excuse for performing like that, but if worst case happens, that just means that's what's unfolded. Our prediction for Ohio State is 11-1, which also puts the Buckeyes, even though they have a loss, right there in the middle of the Big Ten, right there in the middle of the college football playoff, and that probably comes down to the head-to-head with Michigan, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. We move on.
Final team in the East, Michigan State.
The Michigan State Spartans are, let me make sure I'm not speaking out of turn. Yeah, I think so. Michigan State's the most fascinating team to me to watch in the Big Ten this year, and that includes all the teams in the West too, because it really just comes down to, does it all verify? Last year, your eyes didn't deceive you. You saw what you saw. You saw a team that a lot of folks didn't even expect to make a bowl game. And all of a sudden, I mean, they're in the thick of the college football playoff talk in November, no less. But then you enter 2022, the over-under win total 7.5. You know, so it's kind of an odds maker's world telling you, all right, last year was nice. That's probably not where you should set your expectation level. But at the same time, if you believe in what Mel Tucker's cooking up there, like I do, then Michigan State becomes the kind of team where the culture and the identity lends itself to just blind belief in the preseason. There may be some names I don't know yet, but I know Michigan State's way. Therefore, I will know those players by season's end. I think you got examples of that there. Peyton Thorne's an incredibly important player this year because of what you have to replace in the backfield. You don't replace a Kenneth Walker. Their coaches have been out front about saying that. In the aggregate, though, you can replace the production by being a little bit better offensively, making sure you protect football at the quarterback position, and also, sure would be nice to have a little bit better play in the defensive secondary, wouldn't it? they had more passes thrown on them last year than anyone, so they had a chore on their hands. I think they'll be better there. How much better? Probably is going to determine several games. Let's take a look. As you're looking at their schedule here, they got Ohio State at home. They got Wisconsin at home. They go to Michigan. That game at Penn State, last week of the year, how much will that game mean in the grand Big Ten scheme of things? What does the model say? What is the record projection here? The best case for Michigan State is 10-2. In fact, the model paints a very confident 10-2 for the best case for Michigan State. That's you staying healthy. That is you maintaining your identity, even year over year, having lost a lot of talent. That's a good sign if they're able to do that for obvious reasons. The worst case is you kind of just regress back to what expectations were for you last year, and that's 5-7. And that would be obviously a scenario where you get to the end of the year and people are talking about one-hit wonder. They're talking about flash and pan. Well, that's not any conversation we want Michigan State to be in. Our model projects 8-4 as the most likely record prediction for Michigan State. Now, what it also does, and I should mention this, is has a ton of one-possession games. So they are the quintessential Bob team. They're the bounce-of-ball team. You know, they're a turnover here. They're a missed fourth down conversion away there from making that thing 10-2, making it 8-4, making it 6-6. That is why Michigan State is the most fascinating team to me to watch in the Big Ten, because they're a disruptor too. Ohio State's where they're supposed to be. You know, Michigan historically is kind of where they're supposed to be. Folks in the Big Ten don't want Michigan State doing what they're doing right now. They have no interest in battling Michigan State for recruits. They have no interest in getting real strong pushback on the field from Michigan State. Michigan State's just supposed to be one of those nice, scrappy teams, and we end up beating them, and then at the end of the day, we pat them on the head and we say, well, you guys gave us a stiff challenge today. Have fun in East Lansing this winter. Well, that's not Michigan State football anymore. And that's what you need this season to validate. All right, that's the East. Now look at the East. The title odds again. You saw that. Now we go to the West. In the Big Ten West, Wisconsin, a short favorite, I would say. Nebraska's up there. Iowa's only plus 500. Purdue plus 550. Minnesota plus 650. Translation, this is anyone's ball game with Wisconsin being the slight favorite. So what kind of order are we going to go in here in the Big Ten West?
Josh, do you like corn?
Don't give me riddles. Just give me the team.
Nebraska.
Thank you. Nebraska, first up. What could be eventually may not be immediately for them. They went in the transfer portal and they essentially rehauled their entire team, which stands to reason if all or most of that coalesces the way they want it to, eventually this could be a really good team. Is it reasonable to expect that right out of the gate? I don't know. They play Northwestern less than a week from now. I don't know, but the schedule does set up to where if they can get through that opener over in Ireland, then they've got some time to put the pieces together. Their over-under win total sits there at 7, which is a marked improvement, even if they push, from what they have been on the field under Scott Frost. The schedule helps. Ultimately, Casey Thompson's got to get it done here. That's the quarterback transfer. You talk to folks around Texas and talk to folks around Casey Thompson, and I'm not sure the rest of the country understands the severity of his injury last year, that thumb injury, and what he was and wasn't capable of doing. I'm not making excuses for the guy. I'm just giving it to you like it is. If he is 100% of what he's capable of, they've got a really good quarterback, probably an underrated quarterback there in Casey Thompson. I think that improvement along the lines of scrimmage is imperative for them. I think they understand that. The headlines that a lot of people have gotten worked up over nationally about how many times you got to go over to the old trash can at practice, I don't care. I just hope they're better this year. That's what I hope. So let's take a look at what the model says on the record projections. What's the best case for Nebraska? The best case is 10-2 because of the schedule that we've talked about the entirety of the spring and summer. It's very workable. They're a one-possession loss team after one-possession loss team. You know all that, which means if I get a bounce the right way weekly instead of the wrong way, they can make a quantum leap record-wise. But just as easy as it is to say that, I can say their worst case is 3-9 again. Think about the discrepancy there. That's almost irresponsible to put on the screen, but yet this is Nebraska. And so, yes, they're capable of doing something incredible this year, and they're capable of just totally being a tire fire. I have no clue. Be honest, neither do you when it comes to what to expect. So, what's the happy medium? 7-5. That's our record projection for Nebraska. That would be a bowl game for the first time under Scott Frost. That would be double the amount of wins in any given season that he has had there so far. It's there. It is there. It is there for the taking. Please make it happen. Nebraska, 7-5.
Let's go to the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Iowa is no mystery, and yet so many times teams fail to figure it out. They're just waiting for you to lose, and you know what you do? You hand them games, and then they take it from you. It's very methodical, and I respect it because there's probably no team in the Big Ten more in tune with their identity than Iowa. Their over-under win total, 7.5 this year. There is a skill in making more talented teams play your game. Iowa does it all the time. They may not always win, but they are masters. They're experts at making you, full of 4- and 5-star talent, play their game. And it's not fun, and it's physical, and it's taxing, and you never feel like you get out of the gate, and you feel like you're playing in quicksand, and there you go. They've got you. And so what are they going to do this year? Is there any uptick offensively? Because a lot of folks, and I'm in this camp, I watch Iowa, and I just think they are what they are offensively. And is that the case? I think it probably is. But yet, because of how overall secure they are in their identity, and because of overall how deep the talent is on the team, look, they still, if you look at our record projections, they still have a 10-2 in them this year. There is a path where you turn the ball over enough and where they're comfortable enough just sitting there and waiting for it, they go 10-2. But because they are also limited offensively, if you do execute against them, if you don't turn the ball over a whole lot, there's also a 5-7 in there. I think 8-4 for Iowa is what we're going to go with as the most likely projection. 8-4 is a really good year for Iowa, 8-4. Next up.
Let's go to the Wisconsin Badgers.
Wisconsin is the preseason favorite in the Big Ten West. Not by much, but they are the preseason favorite. There have been rumblings out of Madison about an improved pass game. I myself remain skeptical but hopeful. Skylar Bell is a name that we've heard about virtually every week. We've seen some circus catches. Sometimes that's just highlight reel stuff. Sometimes it means you got the real thing on your hands. I hope they do. They lost a number of their premier pass catchers, but what is premier in the passing game at Wisconsin? So you still got guys with a perfect opportunity to flash on the scene. They've got a critical stretch at the end of their season. They closed the season at Iowa, at Nebraska, and versus Minnesota. Those are all in division games, and those are basically the teams they'll be bouncing off of to try and get where they want to be, and that's the Big Ten championship game. This is always a team in contention. Last year, feels like they were off. They weren't. They were 9-4. Let's take a look at the model projections for Wisconsin. The best case, we put it at 10-2, and they, by the way, go to Ohio State in the regular season. So best case, 10-2. In fact, I bumped it up to 11-1 because the only game where you look at and you say, it's going to be a tough one now. I don't know about that, was the Ohio State game. So 11-1 for Wisconsin, best case. Worst case is 8-4. That's not a big drop-off, guys. 8-4 on your worst day is getting it done at a pretty high level. We predict Wisconsin to go 10-2 this year. And my guess, and you're about to see shortly, is 10-2 may very well be good enough to land them in the Big Ten championship game. Last up in the Big Ten West.
PJ Fleck and the Minnesota Golden Gopher.
In that order, maybe. Minnesota is a team the model is suspiciously high on. Really suspiciously, because the over-under win total here is 7.5. We've got them as a top 30 team. I know I haven't told you that yet, so there's breaking news. Minnesota, top 30 in the JP poll. It's very simple. You've got the offensive coordinator back there that you always should have had, Kirk Soraka. They've got health, which they did not have last year at all, so let's cross our fingers for that. And Tanner Morgan, being married again with Kirk Soraka, as it turns out. That's a very good combination. It's a good combination, especially in an ultra wide open division, to make some big things happen. They got to beat Iowa. You know what they got to do? They got to beat the Hawkeyes. They've lost 5 straight to them. They get them at home. They get them the second to last game of the season. You really wonder, don't you, how much will be riding on that game. Let's take a look at the record projections for Iowa. We've got best case for them at 9-3. 9-3, I think, for Minnesota is, number one, it's one of the better records that you've seen them have. 9-3, it would be a phenomenal year for them. 5-7, because of the overall lack of depth that you normally have, because you don't recruit at the highest level in the world. 5-7 is the worst case. Our prediction for Minnesota is 8-4, which puts them right in the mix One bounce here, one bounce there for winning the Big Ten West, at least. Big Ten West. All right, let's take a look at the final standings here, because I just gave you all the records. So in the Big Ten, perception in the Big Ten is the East laps the West. Our model backs that up. Power ratings back that up. We've got Ohio State winning the East. And that really comes down to a head-to-head win over Michigan, because we got the Buckeyes and the Wolverines both losing a regular season game. It's important to note, if Michigan's only losing one and it's at the very end of the season, they're right there still in the playoff mix. Over in the West, we like Wisconsin over Minnesota. Minnesota a little bit higher rated in our model, at least, than what I've seen nationally. So we got Ohio State versus Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. I go Buckeyes because I can't ignore the proven commodities there. And I also can't ignore that if you're going to light Ohio State up, even if defensively they aren't where they need to be this year, you're probably going to light them up through the air, aren't you? I just can't trust Wisconsin to do that, even in a Big Ten championship game scenario. So give me Ohio State over Wisconsin, Big Ten champions. Boom. All right. Hey, what is this show? I've hesitated to do this. I'm going to do it for like 2 minutes here, because I know a lot of you are new. We add, I don't even want to get in the numbers, tens of thousands and tens of thousands of people per month. So a lot of you come in and you're just picking it up on the fly. You don't know what the show is. Well, what the show is something that used to be independent. We did it down in Columbus, Georgia. I didn't know producer Jesse. I didn't know director Colin. And then Shannon Terry called me about 2.5 years ago, who at the time ran 24/7 Sports, and he said, why don't you come do that show here? Just come do it here. Do whatever you want to. They stayed out of the way. They have to this day, and they've let us create this, and you've allowed us to create it. It's pretty unique, very community-based, even though overall, the metrics would tell you it's the biggest college football show in the world, pod and YouTube combined. But we keep it very communal. We don't have a ton of bells and whistles around here. Not interested at all in diving into a lot of the stories that a lot of the national types do, because that's their lane. That's not our lane. What we do love is we love Saturdays in the fall. We don't apologize for it. We don't recognize the off-season. We don't recognize fall weddings, at least on Saturdays. What we do recognize is this is the greatest game in the world. So why not just talk about it and leave the other nonsense at the door? That stuff's going to be waiting for you when the show's over. You want to be a part of this show? It's free. Everything we do is free. You're free to come, free to go. We got a lot of nomenclature around here that may not make sense. What is Pate State? You'll learn, hang around long enough. What is the Ramen Noodle Express? You'll learn, hang around long enough. But I will tell you, this is your college football show. We fully believe that. We put in the work. We don't take days off. We don't take months off. And we come to you every week. So if you're looking for a college football show, this is it. Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday night, 8 Eastern, 7 Central. You can find it on podcast anywhere you get your pods. And you can follow on social at LateKickJosh. And if you just heard that, you're already here. So thank you for being here. Take it to 5 of your friends, because we'd love to keep it free. You know what we need to do next up is we need to go all the way over to the ACC. ACC prediction time. Not going to do every team in the conference, but I do want to dive into a few of them. And I do want to start by looking at some odds here. And I know that a lot of you have doubts about Clemson. Odds makers don't, at least relative to their conference competition. Clemson minus 140 right now to win the ACC. For the record, Miami would be next up. That would be an interesting ACC championship game, wouldn't it? All right, let's start in the Atlantic. What are the division odds to win the Atlantic? A lot of you probably don't have it memorized. That's the one where Clemson and NC State are. So Clemson's a minus 240 favorite to win the Atlantic. NC State's next, but they're plus 450. What order, pray tell, are we going to go in the Atlantic?
Don't take me back to the Wolfpack, NC State.
Nerd alert. NC State, this is the year. It's got to be the year. They return a lot. The lines of scrimmage look really good. Don't have questions at quarterback. And they've already taken a bite out of Clemson. They beat them last year. So they're not shook by Clemson. In fact, they play the style of ball that is perfectly conducive to going into Tiger Stadium and being not comfortable, but at least playing within themselves. Their over-under win total is 8.5. They're built from the inside out. That is absolutely the formula for, if anyone's going to pull this thing off again this year, to pull it off. I've heard a lot of conversation that confuses me about NC State. A lot of people say, are they going to get there this year? Are they going to get over the hump? And I'm asking, what hump? They went 9-3 last year. They were good last year. They already arrived, to me, last year. Now, if you're talking about that 10-win season that they haven't had since the early 2000s, okay. Maybe a little unfair scale to judge them against, but okay. I like everything about them this year. Let's take a look at what the model thinks. What's the best case for NC State? Remember, we did the projection the other night. They only play one of our JP Poll preseason top 25 teams in the regular season. One. So best case scenario is 11-1 for them. That could happen. That is angels in the outfield, flap those wings could happen. Their worst case is 7-5. That's just a regression to the pack, injury, turnover, lose some close games, don't have the highest overall talent level in the world, but their talent level is plenty high enough, believe me. What is the official prediction around here? Our official prediction for NC State, 10-2. That's what we're going with. 10-2 puts them in the mix for, well, a whole lot of things, and that could include the ACC championship game. So stay tuned because we got to see what Clemson does.
Next up, Clemson.
You didn't have to wait long, did we? The Clemson conversation, I think, has kind of been unrealistic over the past few months. You've got one crowd that says they'll be right back in the playoff mix. And then you got another crowd that says they're done. And then you got people like me who say, guys, excuse me, both sides, could we just come to the middle over here and acknowledge that they may go 10-2 this year? What if they go 10-2? We had a question about that the other night. What if they go 10-2? Well, the answer is they had a really good year. That's the answer to what if they go 10-2. Their over-under win total is 10.5. Okay, so if they go 10-2, slight hit on the under, they had a good year. Where is Clemson right now? They open on Labor Day night against Georgia Tech. I think they'll be really good to great. Obviously, the difference in that is 10-2 versus 12-0. I think that there's reason to be optimistic, cautiously, about what we've heard out of Clemson's fall camp so far. I think they understand what they do and don't have at quarterback. Now, hopefully you just get a year two. I call it kind of year 1.5 to year two because DJ didn't really play a whole first year his freshman year. But you hope you get some progression there. You hope you get some more continuity at receiver. Their leading receiver was under 600 yards total last year. So you've got to improve that. You improve that, you improve a lot of things. I think the gap this year is a little bit smaller than what you're used to over the last few years, but they're the overwhelming favorite still for a reason. I want to take a look at a couple of things here. So the first thing is 12-0 is always on the table for them. So our projected records for Clemson, 12-0 is always there. That's the best case. They get NC State at home. There's a little tricky scheduling dynamic, but it's nothing they can't manage. The worst case our model spat out was 8-4, which I have very big problems seeing, even on their worst day. Because even if they have injury at quarterback, they've got a really good backup quarterback. And it's a guy a lot of people are very excited to see. So if Cade Klubnik is playing quarterback for them in week 6 because the worst has happened, are they falling that far off a cliff? No. If they're 8-4, that is the cumulative impact of losing those staffers. That's what I got to imagine that is. And if that's the case, then yeah, we got a different kind of uncomfortable conversation to have in December. Our most likely record for Clemson is 10-2. 10-2 is exactly the scenario that I presented to you a second ago. It's almost like I had peeked ahead. If they go 10-2, I'm going to call it a really good year. Yet, mark my words, if they go 10-2, a majority of the country is not. Because the expectation level and the perception of Clemson has gotten so out of whack that folks think 10-2 is a bad year for them. And it's not. It's just not. You should be down when you lose a couple of longtime staffers at the coordinator position. You should be down. You should be down when you're having to address the kind of offensive and sometimes ineptitude that you had last year. This isn't Xbox. You don't just hit reset. They're real humans you're having to deal with there and real ones you're having to replace. So 10-2 would be a really good year. That is what we see for Clemson. Oh, we got one more in this division, don't we?
What's a good year for Florida State?
What is a good year? Well, I'm about to present my actual record projection for them. You tell me if you think it's good. I think Florida State's on a good path. I have felt that way since day one under Mike Norvell. I hear some chuckling out there. You think because they're not in the title picture yet, it means he's not the right guy. You think because their recruiting class, which I'd love to see improve, is not in the top 10, it doesn't mean they're on the right track. Well, they could be tracking in the right direction and just not going as quickly, maybe, as you want them to. But it is still progress. Their over-under win total 7 this year. Florida State is tracking in the right direction. I just hope it continues this year. They've got a shaky offensive line situation on the interior right now. That's due mainly to injury. I think there's a little bit of improvement on the defensive side of things. I think wide receiver could be sneaky good for them this year. Just don't get knocked off the rails early. That's the trick for Florida State. I mean, they play LSU in week 1, and they'll already have a game under their belt by then. But they've got a tough little road here. They've got at Louisville after that. They've got Boston College. They got a ranked Wake Forest. They go to NC State, Clemson. There's not that string of games where you look and you say, all right, that's the stretch where we'll get right. We'll get everything figured out. Just don't get knocked off the rails. What are the different record scenarios this year for Florida State? Well, as the model sees it, there is a path for 9-3, and that'd be really interesting. That would probably overly inflate expectations down there, but 9-3 is the absolute best case given the way the schedule works out. The worst case, for the same reasons, given the way the schedule works out, 4-8. Because if that schedule is up to its maximum potential, if none of those teams are underachieving, there could be way more losses dealt out than you're comfortable with at FSU. What is our overall prediction for FSU? Overall prediction is 7-5 this year. So the question there that producer Jesse over the loudspeaker said is, what is a good year for them? I think 7-5 is a good year for them. 7-5 is, again, it's another tick up in the right direction. I think it really sets you up to be excited about 2023. Is that the way the fan base feels? First off, let's see if it pans out that way. All right, let's go over to the Coastal right quick. Let's take a look at some of these odds. Obviously, in the Coastal, we got a lot of newness. So in the Coastal, Miami's favored, even though they got a brand new staff down there, to win the division. At Pitt, it's the same staff, but you've got newness at quarterback. At North Carolina, there's newness at quarterback and along the staff. Mac Brown's still there, though, and we got newness everywhere in the Virginias. So let's start. Where are we going to start?
Let's start with the U.
Okay, so let's start with Miami. Miami is an interesting case study here because there's a new staff, but they're not starting from scratch. Far from it, actually. They're the favorite to win the division. Their over-under win total is 8.5 in the preseason. They need to be competitive in every game. That's what they need. When odds makers are telling you you're favored to win the division, even if you don't win it, at the very least, you should be competitive. When you inherit the kind of quarterback talent they have, at the very least, you should be competitive. When you've got the kind of emerging defensive talent they've especially seen through fall camp in the front seven, you should be competitive in every game. Will they be competitive in every game? Offensively, wide receivers got to catch the football. It's a carryover from last year to this year. Defense, I think for them, especially their ability on third downs, is going to impact the outcome of a couple of games. They've got players, and they've got some that are emerging even as we speak. I'm really excited to see Miami, and I'm doubly excited as some of those young guys, like Nigel Kelly, for example, as some of those guys come along more and more. He could be a guy that's not clicking in week 1, 2, or 3, but in week 7, 8, 9, all of a sudden you're saying, wow, some of these young guys rounding in form a little quicker than I thought they were. They can get after the quarterback. They've got themselves a good quarterback. They should be in every game. Let's take a look at record projections. Best case, 11-1 for Miami. They've got the team to do it. They've got the schedule to do it. There's a path to 11-1, which would just be an entirely different conversation. Worst case is 6-6. First-year growing pains, injury, wide receivers drop, young guys, they don't have the 1-12 in them, and they sort of hit a wall, and so you're starting to lose some games you don't really think you should. The prediction, though, is lofty. I admit that. 10-2 is our model prediction for Miami this year. 10-2, as you would well imagine, is going to get you right there in the thick of the ACC championship conversation. One more team I wanted to touch on in this division.
Pitt.
Yeah, just Pitt. Just Pitt. Jesse, spoken like a true Pennsylvanian. Pitt won the ACC last year, which is why a lot of folks were up in arms when we released the JP poll and Pitt was nowhere to be found. Pitt's actually not even in our top 30. It's interesting. I'll explain it to you in a second. Their over-under win total is 8.5. The model is lower on Pitt because when you don't recruit perennially in the top 25 and then you lose first-round type talent at quarterback, it impacts you disproportionately. I know what the preview mags say. I know what the fans say. I talk to a number of Pitt fans about this weekly. I know what could happen. We're trying to figure out what will happen. So what's the most likely path here? You made a change at offensive coordinator. Everything feels good. I know Pat Narduzzi feels good about it right now. We got to get into the season, and we got to win games. We don't just want to get along with him. We got to win games. And I'm telling you, that's where I think the model differentiates a little bit with just this crowd that expects Pitt to be right back in the thick of things. I've been wrong before now, but this model's been right a little bit more than it's been wrong. And here's the good news. Even before they get in conference play, we'll find out a lot. West Virginia in week 1 is a game we'll talk about later in the show. Tennessee in week 2, fascinating game. Because that's the kind of team you could potentially have to trade scores with and keep up with. Is Pitt football in 2022 the kind of team that can do that? Let's take a look at the record projections, because the model is ready to admit that there's a best case here of 10-2. So they were in that ballpark last year. They were 11-3 overall at the end of the year. 10-2 could happen. The worst case is 6-6. The record prediction for Pitt is 8-4. I think 8-4 is a good year for Pitt. Say this out loud. Pitt football wins the ACC, loses a first-round draft pick at quarterback, and still goes 8-4. That's the way it should be framed. It should be a testament to Pat Narduzzi. But because of the way the expectation level is shaping up out there, I don't think it would be viewed as a success. I would, though. So 8-4 is my feel for Pitt. Let's take a look at the entire ACC here. What's the overall projection level? Where are all the records shaking out? The teams that we didn't mention. ACC picture this year. We are taking Clemson to win the Atlantic. Notice same record as NC State. It's the head-to-head. It's NC State going into Clemson. As of now, the model would predict them to lose that game. My feel is that there are a couple of losses on this schedule for Clemson. We think that the NC State game is one that they end up pulling off. And if they do, then they give themselves the inside track to win the Atlantic. In the Coastal, we got Miami by a couple of games. Got Miami winning that thing. Keep in mind, they go 10-2. That's our prediction. One of them is probably at A&M in week 3. So they may very well be, a one-loss ACC team? That's a really good year for Mario Cristobal. And at that point, you put yourself in prime position to just go measure yourself against Clemson. We got Clemson versus Miami in the ACC championship game. As of today, Clemson is the pick to win the ACC championship, which probably puts the Tigers right there in the thick of the playoff picture come season's end. I have something that I need to tell you. I know it's Sunday night. We're not putting everything in this show. Let me take a little sip of caffeine right quick. There is one thing that I left out of tonight's show. So I know I told little Parker on Twitter, I empty the barrel every show. We left one little tidbit in the barrel, and that is a big tidbit, actually. It's the location for week 1 of the Every Given Saturday tour. We are a mere 48 hours away, give or take a couple of minutes, from revealing our week 1 destination. I cannot tell you, look at my hand. I just took that sip of caffeine. There's no way I'm shaking that much already. No, we're shaking out of anticipation, maybe even a little nervousness for announcing our week 1 destination, because I know some of you are going to be aggravated with me because we can only go to one place. Are we going to Gainesville? No, are we going to Fayetteville? Are we going to Columbus? Are we just pulling a shocker and going to New Orleans on Sunday night and foregoing the show? Probably not. But I'm going to announce our week 1 destination Tuesday night on this show. We could not be more excited. I haven't even let the school know yet. That's how secretive it is. So the Every Given Saturday tour, for those of you who are new around here, we go to a game every week. We get to hand pick the one we go to. You heavily factor into that. I can be bought. I can be recruited. I can be swayed. I am not impartial. I have heavy biases, and I can easily be convinced to come to your town. So Tuesday night, looking forward to that. Cannot wait. Every Given Saturday tour merch soon to drop in the Late Kick store. I've got more camp whispers and intel to get to you. I'm only halfway done here so far with whispers and intel. Let's get back to some scrimmage intel. We got to talk about Texas. It finally happened. And I was not expecting it to happen, but Steve Sarkisian, over the weekend, sure enough, Quinn Ewers is our QB1, which comes on the heels of rumor out of Austin that Hudson Card was actually running with the ones and he was looking better. Well, here's what we've been waiting on the entire time with Quinn Ewers. We've been waiting on the click point, which is our own terminology around here. The click point is just, when is it? Maybe it's in camp, maybe it's week 5 of the season where you as a staff are watching and you're saying, All right, we always knew he was more talented. We always knew he's the long-term plan here. We always knew that. But when's he going to take the job? Apparently, the click point happened. I am not a believer in a number of the conspiracy theories floating around, which would paint this kind of picture. Sark leaving the athletic complex, dark Friday night, grabbed by the shirt by a number of boosters, pushed up against a wall, and told in no uncertain terms, it's Ewers or it's your tires, buddy. Quinn Ewers is starting or your brake lines are as good as cut. I personally have no evidence that happened, nor do you. I think that, in reality, Quinn Ewers has been named the starting quarterback for Texas because, drumroll please, he gives them the best chance to win football games. I know it's boring. I know it doesn't make for a great Netflix series, but that is what I believe has happened here. Now, here's what I didn't say. A lot of you just heard something I didn't say. You heard me say Texas is about to soar with Quinn Ewers at quarterback. No, quite the opposite. There will be some growing pains here. That's the nature of having a first-time starter at quarterback behind what could be a shaky offensive line. That's just the way it is. Bruce Hornsby, we got to deal with it. Major injury averted, by the way. Kelvin Banks, who is probably going to start, if not immediately, eventually, at left tackle for them. He's a true freshman. Remember, he committed to Oregon. They flipped him. He's an in-state kid, 5-star. He originally sounded like he had gone down to one of those dreaded season-ending injuries the other day. Nope, not the case. Just a mild ankle sprain, according to Chip Brown of Horns 24/7, which is a great resource, by the way. If you're a Texas fan and you're not over on Horns 24/7, I'd ask, what are you doing with your life? I'm not here to judge. I am here to tell you that mild ankle sprain, Kelvin Banks, they said he probably could have gone back in the game if he needed to the other day. So, next up, speaking of the Canes, we just touched on him a second ago. Nyjalik Kelly was their second highest rated commit in this last class. They are getting more and more excited. By they, I really mean the fan base. The staff is probably trying to temper expectations because he just got there 10 minutes ago. Nyjalik Kelly is going to be really good. It's one of those when, not if, sort of things. He's been coming on very, very strongly in fall camp so far. And I think that it's making an impression on a lot of folks down there. They've had scrimmages. They just had one. And while wide receiver drops continue to plague them offensively, you are seeing the makings of a pretty formidable defensive front. I keep running this by you guys. Everyone's talking about Tyler Van Dyke with good reason. This defensive front, it could be changing some games for them. It could be putting them in position. It could give Miami a lot of those +2 turnover type Saturdays, and all of a sudden, you don't have to light the world on fire offensively. Now, eventually you want to be able to, but there could be some 23-16 slobber knockers. When's the last time we said that in Coral Gables? That they come out the beneficiary of, or on the right side of, because defense gave them an opportunity. Probably a couple of more opportunities than they thought they were going to have on a given Saturday. Keep an eye on Nyjalik Kelly. He's going to play for them eventually this year. Penn State needed something. Going into this spring and going into this summer, they needed something. You know what it was? They needed their transfer portal guys to hit. They got one named Mitchell Tinsley, who is a wide receiver out of Western Kentucky. Jahan Dotson, who'd you lose? Him. Who'd you gain? Mitchell Tinsley. Always follow up who you lost with who did you gain, because that's the one you're going to see on the field this year. They're not just going to make him play with 10 because Jahan Dotson's gone. So Mitchell Tinsley there, you pair him with Parker Washington. Sean Clifford, as veteran, with a capital V, as veteran could be a pretty good, sneaky good passing attack there. Chop Robinson, we're going to choose to use his nickname instead of the name his mama gave him. Chop Robinson is an edge player who also looking very good for them in fall camp. Hunter Norzad is like a Swiss Army knife of an offensive lineman from Cornell. It's in the Ivy League. Ever heard of it? All three of those guys are going to be contributors for them, if not outright starters for them. That's a good thing. It's because you got to trust your evals. And not everyone was after an offensive lineman from Cornell, for example. But if he can win for you, and he's versatile enough to play multiple positions for you, that's all you're looking for. Doesn't really matter where they came from. Plus, he's played a while. He's almost half as old as Sean Clifford. So he's got some seasoning to him as well. Really good to hear. Now let's just get to the Purdue game. Next Thursday night, I think that is. Also, I want to stop in Tallahassee right quick. Florida State is home of Johnny Wilson. Do you know who Johnny Wilson is? I don't think you do. He transferred there from Arizona State. He is an ogre. He is 6'7". He's about 225 pounds, but he doesn't move like one. He's got ogre listings, but he is really, really twitchy. In fact, overly twitchy for a guy 6'7". I was reading some of Brendan Sinone's writing over on Knowles 24/7. And he was talking about how he's not just a big body they put out there. Johnny Wilson's been a guy in scrimmages that has come on to the point where they're not going to be able to keep him off the field. And winning one-on-ones, blocking, quickness, there are a lot of facets of his game that take a lot of folks by surprise when they see him, because you see a guy that big, you just figure, well, it probably someone they could put at H-back, probably someone they'd use in goal line. But, how's this guy going to get off the line? Well, against the better corners in the country, he may struggle. But, hey, most good receivers struggle there. But Johnny Wilson's a guy who continues to work on his craft. That's first and foremost. He's committed to it. Secondly, matchups are very, very important in this game that we all love so much. And if Johnny Wilson is 6'7", and can all of a sudden turn 50-50s into 70-30s for you down in the red zone, I don't care if he serves no other purpose on the team. If Florida State, which was woeful through the air last year, if Florida State all of a sudden found themselves a matchup advantage or two, they got some size at receiver in that room overall. If they found that, this is not a team that's loaded to the gills with 5 stars left and right. They've got to flex where they can flex, and Johnny Wilson may give them an opportunity to flex. All right, I know that I made you wait for a little while. Another sip of caffeine. Hold on. I don't have a problem. I'm baiting some people who think I do with that. We've got to predict the SEC. Kind of the main event, I guess. So let's dive into it. There's nowhere to start. Let's just dive in. We're going to go random. The SEC East is the side of the SEC that I want to start on. Let's take a look at some conference odds. And let's take a look at some conference odds first are Bama, Georgia, and everyone else. So we know that. I almost kind of skipped past it in my mind. I'm going to start divisionally in the East, and let's take a look at how that stacks up, because it's Georgia, sure enough, but it's not Tennessee, Florida, 2-3. It's Kentucky. Kentucky's sitting there in the number 2 spot. And that's interesting. So we'll get to the Cats in due time. Georgia, the overwhelming favorite here. Should they be the overwhelming favorite? Short answer, yes. Have crazier things happened? Also, yes. Let's dive in. First up,
Florida Gators.
A little reverb there with the Florida Gators. Their starting 22 can play. I have very little doubt about that. Some of my friends and a lot more of my enemies over on the Swamp 24/7 board have been asking about the depth situation there. Are we really as thin as they say we are? In terms of quality depth, yeah. I don't want to sit here and tell you about your team. But yeah, that's been echoed by a few folks inside that building. If you could shake your magic 8 ball and promise me few, if any, injuries with Florida this year, the over at 7 wins would be the biggest lock on planet Earth. But you cannot do that. You also can't tell me where the injuries are going to come. So we got to try and figure this thing out. They've got tough staffs to face, not just teams. They face 2 of the most veteran coaching staffs in America the first 2 weeks of the season, in Utah with Winningham and Stoops at Kentucky in week 2. And then they go to Knoxville, and that's just in the first month of the season. Anthony Richardson is good enough to win some games they otherwise were going to lose. He is good enough to drag them to a win a couple of times this year. What does the model say about Florida? What is the best case for the Gators this year? You may think it's a little higher, but the model says 9-3, best case for Florida this year. You cannot avoid how thin they are at a few positions. And there is no world where you go uninjured at every position the whole year. So even best case, you're going to have some attrition somewhere. 9-3 would be a really good year. Worst case is 5-7. I don't really think we need to go down that road. 7-5 is the most likely prediction the model spits out for Florida. I don't think there'd be a ton of Gator folks happy about that, but I think if you pair that with what they end up doing in recruiting this cycle, which promises to be better and better by the day, we could work with that. You avoided disaster. You're building your roster back the way you want it. We can work with that. My sneaking suspicion is the model may be a tinge low on where it should be with Florida. But 7-5 is the official prediction.
Let's go with Kentucky.
The Kentucky Wildcats are the second odds-on favorite to win the SEC East. Distant second, but second nonetheless. This is the year they need to make it happen. I mean, if they're ever going to pull some magic off here, you got the best quarterback you've had there in quite a while. You get the 2 Mississippi schools from the West. There's no easy draw from the West, but that's pretty much the way you would want to draw it up. And you get Georgia at home late in the year with a solid schedule dynamic advantage because of the stretch that Georgia will be coming off. They've got to define who they are offensively, though. They lose some talent. I don't need to talk to you about how good Wan'Dale Robinson is. I also don't need to talk to you about how good Will Levis is. Everybody's got an opinion on that already. I'm very interested at, come December, what we claim their offensive identity is, though. See, Chris Rodriguez, I think, is one of the more important players in the SEC this year. The running back there at Kentucky had 9 games last year of 100 or more yards. He's going to have to be a workhorse for them. That's even with Will Levis in the backfield, because balance is ultimately what they're going to need. They can't be what Mississippi State is offensively. They need a good balance there, and they need to feature guys like Chris Rodriguez. He needs to be a guy that is around that early November timeframe when Georgia comes in there in contention for all SEC honors. What will that game mean, by the way? That November 19th date against Georgia, what will it mean? Will the East be on the line that day? That's kind of in the remains to be seen camp. Let's take a look at the record projections. What does the model say about Kentucky? Best case, 10-2. Worst case, 6-6, which in Kentucky terminology is not a terrible worst case to have. The prediction is 9-3. So the model's buying Kentucky. We got them top 25 in the country. The model buys Kentucky. 9-3 puts them right in contention for the conversation they're not normally in. If not even the SEC East, you're talking about in some scenarios being in that New Year's Day bowl rotation, depending on how things shake out. So 9-3 for Kentucky, a very, very solid year to say the least.
It's time to talk about the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I figured that was coming. Georgia lost a lot of first-round talent. That's the bad news. The good news for them is they've also got a lot of first-round talent. You just don't know their names yet, but you soon will. Georgia's the overwhelming favorite to win the East, over-under win total of 11. I have a fascination with how Kirby Smart plays this thing this year, because I am fascinated to learn whether they're ready to lean on offense to win games. Everyone loves to talk about that offensive revolution in Tuscaloosa about 8 or 9 years ago, and I'm looking at Georgia, and I've been a believer they've tried to evolve a little bit the past couple of years, and for differing reasons, they haven't fully been able to dive into it. Now they've got to lean into it. They've got established quarterback play. Although they're a little bit thin there, they've got good wide receiver talent. This is the deepest tight end room in about 70 years college football has seen, and I just don't go back further than 70 years. So they need help at wide receiver. If they can stay relatively healthy there, this should be a team that can win games offensively and give that defense time to round into whatever form they're going to end up being. What's the best case for Georgia? This is a team that now and for the foreseeable future will always have a best case of 12-0. Their worst case is no lower than 9-3. It's hard to be that talented and fall below 9-3 worst case. Our prediction for Georgia this year is 11-1. Because while they are very talented, I do think that when you're replacing what they're replacing defensively, when you're coming off a title and you have some more greenery on your roster that needs to get its collective feet under it, and you don't have a dynamic Heisman-type presence at quarterback, you're due for a loss somewhere along the way. Hey, you lose games sometimes coming off a title, and it ends up being the best thing that could happen to you. So that's how I'm going to present that loss in a positive manner for Georgia fans. 11-1 is the prediction for the national champ from last year, which puts them right in contention for the same thing again this year.
Let's go to Missouri.
Let's go to Missouri. They need to buy time for this recruiting class. They just brought in a pretty good one. Luther Burden, for example, that's a wide receiver they'll get on the field immediately this year. Their over-under win total's 5, though, and it's hard for me to expect a ton out of the quarterback position for them this year. We've been surprised before. I don't know. And they play in the wrong conference to be saying that kind of stuff. They need to be bowl eligible. That's what they need to be. So you're looking at their win total there. They need to find a way to bowl eligibility. Don't go backwards. Buy yourself some time. Don't have the 4-8, 3-9 type disaster. Colin, let's go right to the record projections here. What's the best case? The best case would be 8-4. That would be a phenomenal year for Missouri. The worst case has disaster written on it, though. That's 4-8. And that's where a lot of folks go into year 4 under Eli Drinkwitz, and they question whether he needs to be the guy. You've heard that conversation before. Ooh, the prediction's 5-7 here. That's what the model spits out. You miss a bowl game, you go backwards, and all of a sudden, you look at the schedule here, they miss Alabama this year. They did not play Texas A&M this year. So It never gets easier in the SEC. I don't know what 5 and 7 would lead to conversationally, but that's what the model spits out from Missouri.
South Carolina.
Let's go to Columbia, South Carolina. This is the toughest team to project in the SEC East because I fully believe in the progress there. I also fully believe in the difficulty of schedule. That's not something they can afford to worry about, but we sit behind the mic, so we can afford to worry about that. Spencer Rattler is one of the most important players in college football this year. Number one, because he could single-handedly impact multiple teams' seasons, including South Carolina, but also for the future of this program, if Spencer Rattler ends up being what they hope he is this year, boy, they could package that up for a long time in recruiting. And they can package it not only in high schools, but they can do it in the portal as well. He is the gateway. Spencer Rattler is the gateway to opening up a new recruiting approach for South Carolina. And I think he's also doing a lot of good for Luke Doty there. No matter who's their starting quarterback, I think it's been very good for both guys. Over under win total is 6.5. It's a schedule that is sort of a tale of three parts, if you will. They've got that stretch early, 2-game stretch, where they play Arkansas and they got Georgia, but then a couple of winnable games. Then they dive into Kentucky and A&M, but then they got a couple more winnable games. And then they got Florida, Tennessee, Clemson at the end of the year. So at each stop, there are two spots on that schedule where you can't afford to catch your breath necessarily because every week's a competition, but you get what I'm saying. There's a difference in playing A&M and Georgia versus playing Missouri and Vanderbilt and Charlotte and South Carolina State. So if you got to play the teams they got to play, that's probably the way I would line it up. Let's take a look at the record projections for South Carolina this year. The best case for Shane Beamer's team would be 9-3. That would be a marvelous sophomore campaign there. Because of how brutal the schedule is and the possibility of injury, the worst case takes them all the way down to 4-8. The prediction for South Carolina this year is 7-5. I cannot stress enough. There is a path this year, especially if the losses are close, where 7-5 from South Carolina could mean they were a top 20 team, because that's how difficult the schedule is. So it's never been more important than with some of these teams with these high-end schedules to run that record through a proper filter. 7-5 for South Carolina is how we see that one playing out.
I volunteer Tennessee.
Yep, Tennessee. I think Tennessee's year 2 factor matters a ton. Josh Heupel came in last year after the hiring cycle. He had a ton of attrition in the portal, and somehow they still overachieved relative to the preseason expectation. Defense is a major question here. I don't think that's a shock to anyone. I've listened to Josh Heupel talk, especially a lot this past week, and he's talked about their depth. They've improved defensively depth-wise. He's not just talking about the overall talent level. He's talking about the guys they can depend on, the guys who are smart enough to put on the field, the guys who are competitive enough. Intangibles and tangibles. They have depth there. I think that will prove itself out. They probably won't be a top 20 unit, but they don't have to be with the way they can score. Cedric Tillman at wide receiver is already a household name in most places around the SEC. I think he nationally could be a household name this year. That depth on defense, let's just walk ourselves through. And let's say when we go to record projections here for Tennessee, let's say that is the case. If that defensive depth is improved, like Josh Heupel and his staff believe it is, you know what Tennessee could do this year? They could go 10-2. That's the best case scenario for Tennessee. And if they go 10-2, that's the team that's there in contention, right there alongside Georgia for the SEC East. So if 10-2 is best case, what is worst case? Worst case for Tennessee is 5-7. I think there's a pretty healthy gap there, obviously a gap of 5 games. I think there's a pretty healthy gap because there's still room here for them to go backwards record-wise. You come in year 1 and you do what you do, that's not the starting point. They make you start from scratch every year. You got to win all those games again. So 5-7 is still their worst case. Model is high on Tennessee. 9-3 is what it spits out for the most likely record projection. That gets them the over in the win total. That gets them in some really good bowl conversation. That makes them potentially a contender for most of the year in the SEC East. And hey, it also means they sprung an upset or two. At that point, we just got to figure out where those upsets are. We got to do it.
Vandy.
Yeah. So let's breeze through this right quick. Hat tip Barton Simmons. Vanderbilt is actually probably in the air right now. They're flying to Hawaii. The over-under is 2.5 wins. Colin, let's take a look at what the model spat out just for fun. The best case for Vanderbilt is 5 wins, okay? So that would be an overwhelming over. The worst case is 1-11. The model spat out 3-9. So you can either look at that one of two ways. Either, they lost 9 games, or the over hit. I'm going to choose to look at it as we project the over to hit. With that, we hop over the Chattahoochee River to the SEC West. Let's take a look at those preseason odds. It's Alabama's conference, right? Yeah, well, at least their division, and at least according to odds makers preseason. Alabama's a minus 500 favorite in the SEC West. I put out a stat today, and I think some of you saw it on Twitter. So we have every SEC West team preseason rated in the top 25, which is insanely deep, right? I don't remember ever saying that about any division. And yet, we're so high on Bama that I took Jalen Milroe, who's their backup quarterback, and I put him at starter, and I simulated the season. The model would pick Alabama to win the West, as deep as it is, with Jalen Milroe at quarterback. So that's taking a Heisman Trophy winner out and putting Milroe in. Milroe's a truck, by the way, for those of you who are unfamiliar. Jalen Milroe, you don't look at him and say back up anything. But I'm just telling you, that's how good the model views this team before they've played a game. So with that in mind, let's dive into the division, shall we?
Slice bread, Texas A&M.
Okay, Texas A&M. This is not a rebuilding year. It's not a build towards year. I cannot emphasize this enough. This team is good enough to win this year. They're good enough to be competitive or win every game. They outclass 90 to 95% of their schedule. That's not the kind of team you talk about being in rebuilding mode or being in 2023 and beyond mode. They can win this year. It's a big year for Jimbo Fisher because as he starts to stack a lot more of this offensive perimeter skill on top of what they've already got out there, they've got to improve in some of those critical metrics. You know, that explosive pass play, 20 yards or more downfield stuff, that stuff's got to improve. There's no question about that. When you've got A-Chain, when you got Aniyah Smith, when you got Evan Stewart, and the likes of that recruiting class coming in, it's a non-starter. They got to get better there. And I think they will. It's how much better. How big a quantum leap do you make? Their defense is going to get better and better as the year goes on. They got Miami and Arkansas early. They got App State in week 2. Let's not overlook that. There's a stretch there where they're on the road 3 consecutive weeks. They're in Dallas against Arkansas. They're in Starkville against Mississippi State, and then they're in Tuscaloosa. This is with no bye week. They're in Tuscaloosa against Alabama. I know some of you think that Alabama controls the schedule-making process. They don't. But this is not my evidence because this is evidence to the contrary. So Texas A&M, what is the record projection for them this year? Best case for Texas A&M is 11-1 because there's only one team they're going to face this year more talented than them. So you got a chance to go 11-1, especially if offense starts rounding into form and they do start doing more through the air than they've been doing in the past. The worst case is 7-5. That would be an extremely uncomfortable December conversation. Just going to spoil it for you now. If A&M actually regresses, the knock on them is they win 8 games. If they get better talent-wise and go backwards, bad December. Not a Merry Christmas for Jimbo. The record prediction here for Texas A&M is 9-3. And 9-3 is a really good year. I personally think they're capable of even more than that, but it's the model, it's not me. I think when you look at the role they could get on early in the year, and whether they get through that Bama game unscathed or not, they set themselves up. South Carolina, Ole Miss, Florida, Auburn, UMass, LSU, you're not going to convince me that they're not the better team and the favored team in every one of those games. I think that game at Mississippi State, by the way, before Bama is one of the biggest traps in the conference this year. But there you go. 9-3 is the prediction for Texas A&M.
Next up, Ole Miss.
Oh, boy. All right, here we go. Let me tiptoe around this. Ole Miss got a lot of really good pieces out of the transfer portal, and I credit their staff for doing that. How quickly can that staff turn pieces and individuals into a team the caliber of which they were last year? Because they were a double-digit win team last year. Their preseason over-under win total is 7.5 here. If you look at their schedule, and I think everyone who has bet them over or under has looked at it, they've got a ton of runway. They've got a really ultra-workable first half. They go Troy, Central Arkansas, Georgia Tech, Tulsa, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Auburn. We're almost to Halloween. Then they get into the LSUs and A&Ms and Alabamas and Arkansas and Mississippi State. So, do they trip up early? Man, signs point to no. We've got an under bet on Ole Miss at 7.5. And I think Zach Evans is going to be a monster at running back for them. I have no doubt about him. I think he's going to be one of the premier backs in the country this year. I question whether they have anything close at quarterback to what they need to have this year. And then the second part is it is very hard to quantify how long it takes for all those transfer portal pieces to coalesce. If it happens immediately, you end up being what Michigan State was last year. But there are going to be some other cautionary tales in this new portal era that we're in. And I never know when it's coming. But I think if there is a wobbly tire in the West this year, my personal feel has been that it's going to be Ole Miss. Now, here's what the model thinks. So that's me personally. Let's take a look at what the model thinks. Best case is 9-3. The worst case it spat out was 5-7. But see, it's kind of in line with me. Thank you, model. The model spits out 6-6 as the most likely record projection. In fact, I may be higher on Ole Miss than the model. I may go 7-5 for them. So shame on the model. I'm here to defend you against the model. I just think things are going to get real very fast come mid-October. And if they're not what you hope they are, if they are what I think they are, it's going to be tough to find a win on the back half of that schedule. Who knows? Crazier things have happened.
I got to say it. Roll Tide.
Yeah. Thank you, Harvey. Alabama is the overwhelming favorite to win this division. This is not a rebuilding year anymore. That's the good news. So you get peak Bama this year. You may end up getting the best version of them we've seen under Nick Saban. It's going to be the best pass rush you've seen in the Nick Saban era. You've got a returning Heisman quarterback. They are emerging very quickly at wide receiver. Treyshawn Holden. I think a lot of those young guys whose names you don't know yet, you will know probably by the middle point of the season. Offensive line figured to be a huge concern for them. I don't think so. I think Tyler Steen coming in at left tackle and then J.C. Latham getting that time to develop and being plugged in now at right tackle, they feel good. And I feel good because they feel good about where they're at. The strategy against Bama, if you didn't know any better, is we'll just run the ball on them. Will you? Okay. Well, DJ Dale and Byron Young, who I'm really high on this year, and Justin Eboigbe, those are the three guys they'll probably start on that defensive line. Senior. You're used to being able to run the ball on them because you're used to having a bunch of kids start up front. Not this year. So really interesting to see what they do in defensive line recruiting going forward. But for the here and now, there's not much of a weakness on this team. Maybe you don't have a dynamic pass catcher at tight end. Maybe, just maybe, they're not quite as good at corner as people expect. Maybe. These are such first world problems. Let's take a look at the record projections for Alabama. Best case is always 12-0 with them. I don't need to bore you with that. Their worst case is a double-digit win season. And they've got an incredibly underrated road slate this year. This is not a layup for them at all, but their worst case is still 10-2. This is a team that the model predicts to go 12-0. So their best case is also their most likely. We don't see that very often, only because you can't go 13 and -1, I guess. So 12-0, that's what the model likes with Alabama. More on the Crimson Tide in a little bit.
Next up, Mississippi State.
Do you know a lot about Mississippi State? I don't think most of you do. It is my belief, because we got Mississippi State rated inside the top 20. So actually, we got Mississippi State power rated number 20 to start the year, and a lot of people are looking at me sideways. I believe if you put LSU jerseys on this team, they would be a lot of folks' dark horse contender in the West. Because the only thing you doubt about them is you haven't seen Mississippi State do it. This team can do that. They can play that role. Now, their over-under win total 6.5 because they play our toughest schedule in the country. But what shouldn't be overlooked as you check out how difficult that schedule is we went through this a couple of weeks ago. They have their own little individual scheduling dynamics. So when A&M comes in there, you got to remember, A&M's got that game sandwiched between Arkansas and Bama. So it's not the easiest path for their opponents either. You only play one of them per week. You don't play your schedule on a Saturday. You play one team on a Saturday. So Mississippi State's going to take some lumps this year, but they have a very underrated roster. Had an NFL scout type tell me a couple of weeks ago it's the most underrated roster from a future NFL perspective in the country. I just think they're being overlooked because they're Mississippi State, not because of what they do or don't possess the ability to do. So let's take a look at the record projections. The best case for Mississippi State this year, 9-3, even with that record. You know what that's telling you? That's that model telling you If this team played in the ACC, they would challenge for the conference championship. If this team played in the Big 12 or the Pac-12, they would challenge for the conference championship. Worst case, because of this schedule, is 3-9. The most likely record prediction per our model for Mississippi State is 8-4. That would be, and I cannot overstate this enough, a phenomenal year. If Mississippi State goes 8-4 against their schedule, it's likely they've played at a top 15 level nationally. That's how tough it is to win 8 games against what they're going to face this year. We move on.
It's your time, Josh. Arkansas.
Well, is it my time or is it our time? Because I don't want to leave Sam Pittman and Arkansas out of this. Arkansas is becoming now a program where the intangibles and the culture are such that you blindly buy them, or at least I do. The biggest disconnect nationally with Arkansas is they lost Treylon Burks. Everybody's talking about Arkansas losing Treylon Burks. You should. It's a first-round talent at wide receiver. They don't come through Fayetteville very often. That's why I really need you to understand, I don't think they're falling off at receiver. I don't think there's one receiver there that is Treylon Burks. I think their receiver unit is going to be fully equipped to pick up that slack this year. And that's an area where I wouldn't have said it in the spring. I don't think Sam Pittman would have said it in the spring. I think Kendall Briles, being this the first time he's ever had a returning quarterback, has a lot to work with still. They have a lot of improvement still to be had in their passing game. Even with how many accolades KJ Jefferson has enjoyed, I think they can get better in their overall passing metrics. I truly believe that this year. They'll always have what they need on the ground this year. I have no question about the mentality of that team. I think that they still feel targeted in a lot of ways. Number one, by their own administration, because if you look at the schedule, it's ridiculous. They go to BYU. I cannot wrap my mind around the fact that they're going to go to Provo, Utah in the middle of conference play, no bye week until afterwards. So, be that as it may, I've just got to reiterate, same thing I said with Mississippi State. The schedule is daunting. You only play one team per week. Arkansas doesn't have to play a schedule on a Saturday. They've got to play Texas A&M. They beat them last year. They get Bama, they get them at home. They go to Mississippi State, at Auburn, you get the picture. This is a team that can be competitive in every game they play this year. Let's take a look at what the model thinks with the records. Best case for Arkansas actually is 11-1, which is shocking considering I actually didn't make that, the model did. And secondly, because of how stiff the schedule is, but it goes back to what I talked about. The Alabama game is the only one that you look at and say, that's probably a sure loss. It's not even a sure loss there because they play them at home. Ask Texas what it's like going up there. Secondly, Bama struggled on the road last year. Florida, Auburn, A&M, so it could happen. My point is 11-1 is the best case. 6-6 is the worst case. 9-3 is the record that the model projects, which is a solid 2 games above the over-under win total. Arkansas is going to be an overachiever again this year. The passing game's probably going to surprise a lot of you. It won't surprise them, and if you've been paying attention during fall camp, it probably won't surprise you. They may need to score a few more points this year. So I like Arkansas again this year. I know that's not the biggest shock in the world, but I like them again this year.
It's time to talk about Auburn.
Oh, boy. I think this is the toughest situation any coaching staff has been placed in the country. Part of it not by their own doing, but ultimately you're the one that gets paid a lot of money to win more than 6 games because that's their over-under preseason win total. Have they figured out quarterback? I know they're probably ready to name a starter. Have they figured quarterback out? There are 2 very different points I'm trying to make there. These are the most important first 5 games in the SEC. Plain and simple. If Auburn stumbles at all in the first month to a little over a month, it'll go downhill quickly. I think they got to beat Penn State at home. I think they got to beat Missouri at home. I think they need to be no worse than 4-1 and more than likely need to be 5-0 coming out of that October 1st date against LSU. You got to build up as much steam as you can because it goes uphill really, really quick. And I don't know if their propeller's big enough to push them after that. But there is a great big intangible with this team that I don't want you to ignore. They feel like they got targeted. They felt wronged. They felt like when that group came after their head coach, they also came after folks on that team. You only get one chance to play college football. And a lot of folks, not a lot, some folks around that program tried to snatch the rug out from under players on that team, not just the staff. The players were the ones who were having to deal with it too. There is a lot of energy, a lot of it. Now, it takes more than that to win football games, but that's certainly part of it. So that spirit they talk about down there all the time, they've got it. There is no doubt in that locker room. They've got all that. They still got to have players who are good enough to win football games. And that's the great unknown with Auburn. Let's take a look at what the model says. Best case for Auburn, 8-4. Worst case, bottom falls out, probably staff overturned, 3-9. The prediction is 7-5 here. So that hits the over on the win total. I think it's good enough to buy Harsin and his staff another year. 7 wins would be, while not what their expectation level is down there, it would be a really good year, given what the circumstances have been off the field.
Let's wrap with LSU.
Yeah, let's do that. Is LSU in a rebuilding year? Let me just throw that out there. So Brian Kelly's got his new staff down there. LSU does not do rebuilding years, especially not with a talent roster like this. They may have the best receiver stable in the SEC. They got multiple quarterbacks down there that they think they can roll with. So you probably can accomplish both. Let's play to win this year, but we're also rebuilding. We're just retooling on the fly. When you've got the wide receiver room they have, when you've got the potential at quarterback they have, you've got a shot. Most every week you play. Bama comes in there this year. So their biggest test is not going to come in week 1 or 2. I think in week 3, you need to be very careful because there is some fun momentum down there right now with their secondary. And I am telling you as plainly as I can from people who would know that you need to take a cautionary approach for LSU, especially at corner this year, because I'm not so sure that they're built to go up against the best passing attacks in this league. One of them you're going to face against Mississippi State. You're going to get one against Tennessee. You're going to get one against Ole Miss. You're going to get the best against Alabama. We'll find out there. I think they could take their lumps in the secondary. Even though they addressed it as best they could, you cannot get around the fact that you're playing with guys who are less than ideal, even at their best, to deal with some of the passing attacks you're going to face down here. There's nothing they can do about that at this point. What they can do is they can score as much as they possibly can. Their best case is 9-3, according to the model. Their worst case is 5-7. The model has them going 7-5 as the most likely path this year for LSU. I think it'd be an okay year for them. It'd be a touch or two below what most LSU fans expect, but I am trying my best to explain to some of my LSU buddies. There is a path that includes 7-5 and success, because maybe that 7-5 includes finding some things out you needed to find out about your program in order to flourish in 2023 and beyond. Let's take a look at those final standings. We just got through the entire SEC. Can you believe that? Let's take a look at these final standings. The SEC final standings here, we got Georgia winning the East, Tennessee finishing second over there, right in front of Kentucky. So you probably got a head-to-head win there, Tennessee over Kentucky. Over in the West, it's Alabama 12-0. It's A&M and Arkansas both at 9-3. And then you go Mississippi State, LSU. We got Ole Miss 6-6, but finishing last in the West. Please don't be fooled by that. I mean, Ole Miss would be very competitive in a lot of other conferences. It's just an insanely deep division. SEC championship game. It's Bama and Georgia again. And in the SEC championship game, we're taking Alabama over Georgia. It's going to be really, really, really tough to beat Alabama this year. They're watching us tonight in Columbus, Ohio. Thank you for tuning in. They're watching us in Newport News, Virginia. They're watching us in Fort Stewart, Georgia. We appreciate all you guys being tuned in. If you have not already, I see we're well over 1,000 likes already. Why not try for 2,000 likes tonight, right here during the live show? Also want to remind you guys as we shift to another conference here, the Late Kick store is open. I don't need to advertise it because it's doing just fine without advertising it, but PateStateMaterial.com is open. Don't tell them I sent you. Let's go to the Big 12, shall we? Let's get refreshed here. Not only is I'm going to do something for the first time here. We take a little swig of caffeine. But what you don't know is we've also got the Publix water jug right here. And we got to stay hydrated because we're going through the entire country right now. So a quick swig of water, and we're good to go. Let's talk about the Big 12. I told you the other night, I was not lying to you. This is the conference I'm most excited to watch this year. It's the conference where anything could happen. There is no clear favorite. There are about 6 or 7 teams that you reasonably could make an argument for winning. And the odds right now, just to give you an idea, Oklahoma's the favorite currently to win the conference. They're plus 190. Texas plus 250. Oklahoma State plus 450. Baylor returns a better quarterback. Their entire O-line and D-line, they're plus 650 odds, fourth best team, according to odds makers, to win the conference this year. So let's talk about this conference. Let's talk about a few teams, then I'll show you how we think the whole thing's going to shake out.
Talk about Baylor.
Yeah, I'll talk about Baylor. You don't need to tell me twice. Preview Magazine Culture is going to tell you that there is a lack of proven players for Baylor this year. And it's not something that you've heard me say. It's not something I will say because the culture and the system are proven, which is going to lead to year over year you finding out mid-season Baylor had the players all along. My favorite preview magazine didn't know their names. I didn't know their names. I got fooled into thinking that meant they were weaknesses. When they've been brought through and developed by that system they've got, they're going to be fine. They're going to be just fine. And let me also remind you, we don't need to reiterate, but remember, they chose to go in a different direction at quarterback than the guy who took them to the Big 12 championship game last year. They've got their entire O-line and D-line back. They've got the nucleus of that team back. You're going to hear a lot about linebacker, secondary, who's he going to throw the ball to? They'll be there. I have full confidence. The pieces will be there. The pieces will emerge. Let's take a look, as I think this program has staying power, at what the model thinks. Does the model agree? What's the best case for Baylor this year? Best case is 11-1. In a wide open conference, of course, if you can win every game, 11-1 could happen. 6-6 is tough for me to see, even in the worst of times, but 6-6 is the worst case. Our prediction is lofty. We got Baylor going 10-2, which, if I'm not mistaken, may be good enough to win the conference. I don't know. We'll find out in a couple of minutes.
Let's talk about Oklahoma.
Talk about the Sooners, okay? You know what is interesting here, aside from just everything's new, is combining Jeff Lebby at offensive coordinator with Dylan Gabriel at quarterback. And overall, perhaps still the best talent roster when you account for development in the Big 12. Their secondary, I don't know how much improvement we'll see. It will be immediately improved just because Brenton Venables lives in that area code now. It'll be immediately improved. I think offensively, even though you can make the argument that they could be explosive offensively, I just think they'll be less and less reliant on needing fireworks. You know, I think they'll be a little more reliant on a sustainable kind of offense. There's a little bit less fluctuation. Now, maybe you trade not scoring 45 or 50 points as often, but if you can score 34 routinely, I'll take that. I think that this is going to be a really good team this year. They'll get better as the season goes on. I don't think you need to wait 2 or 3 years. This is a ready-made product. Remember, they didn't fire Lincoln Riley. He chose to leave, so things weren't going poorly. Could they go even better? Recruiting, in short term, has already said yes. What does the model say Oklahoma will be on the field this year? Best case, 11-1. Worst case, 7-5. The prediction for Oklahoma this year, we got them right there. 10-2. There's some up and down. There's some volatility in the Big 12, but at the end of the day, if they're 10-2, which is what the model thinks they will be, they're right there in contention for the Big 12 championship game. Remember, there are no divisions here, so just the 2 best teams go to the championship game. Next up.
Horns up or horns down for Texas?
Could it be somewhere in the middle? We'll see. Texas is the most volatile out of all the Power 5 teams when it comes to the best case and the worst case. Their over-under win total's 8.5, which is down from 9 last week, so we got that under just in time. If Quinn Ewers is the man, let's talk about best case. If Quinn Ewers is the man and this passing game clicks, they can win the Big 12. No 2 ways about it. But also, response is a very important word for them this year. Remember last year they lost to Oklahoma. Steve Sarkisian admitted at the end of the year, I never got that team back. Bo Davis had that epic rant on the bus, which we played on the show. We are big Bo Davis fans on the show. He said what needed to be said. Ideally, players would have been saying that, but a coach had to say it. All that means what? How much did you improve? How far have you come? Well, you won't find out when things are good. You'll find out when you see a bump in the road. Maybe it's week 2 against Alabama. How do you respond? Response is what will determine the outcome of this season for them. Let's take a look at the best case. The best case for Texas is they respond admirably, and they go 10-2 this year. And that's probably getting them to the Big 12 championship game because Bama loss is probably in that 10-2. The worst case is 5-7. That would be missing a bowl again, and that would be bowlless in the first 2 years of Steve Sarkisian. That wouldn't be fun. The model says 8-4 for Texas. That hits the under, but there's this weird place in my mind that still thinks it's a good year. And something at least tangible and solid has happened. They've had some downs, but they've had a few more ups. In that 8-4 world, we finally get to ask what bowl game Texas is going to. So 8-4, I know you guys want more, but at least disaster didn't strike with 8-4, and you're trending in the right direction. Okay, let's take a look at the overall conference picture here in the Big 12. This one is so hard. Big 12, hardest conference to predict in America. We've got Baylor and Oklahoma, each going 10-2. That is our Big 12 championship game. To give you an idea of how this conference shakes out behind it, Oklahoma State at 9-3, Texas at 8-4, my Iowa State Cyclones at 7-5. Everyone's sleeper. I mean, I know a guy in Singapore, doesn't speak a lick of English, never seen the sport in his life, except to say that Kansas State is his sleeper this year. TCU, West Virginia, that's how it shakes out on down the line a little bit. Oklahoma versus Baylor. I've got Oklahoma over Baylor in the Big 12 championship game. My thinking is if OU gets themselves into that game, that means they have bought themselves enough time to round into a form that I think, when at its best, is going to be too difficult to overcome. Baylor in the Big 12 championship game again, but ultimately we have Oklahoma winning that thing. I'm so happy with what we're about to do. I'm so happy. Week 1 is still 13 days away, but the Ramen Noodle Express is here right now. What is the Ramen Noodle Express? It is something I made up a long time ago. The nickname came from a guy who used to call our radio show way back in the day in Columbus, who threatened us. He said, "Give me winning gambling picks, or my children will have to eat ramen noodles the rest of the week." Not him, his children. And so you've never felt pressure until a kid's diet is on the line. I kept the nickname. Our betting model is proprietary. It's right here on this computer. It wins for us every year. Last year was one of its less performing years, and it still won 55.4% against the spread. So we do good every year. The only rule is bet them all or don't bet any of them. We are starting our Week 1 best bets tonight. I'm not waiting until next week. I got 4 of them. We're ready to move on. Nothing fancy here, no game breakdown. If I'm giving you these picks, it's because the model says fire on them. The first one's going to be Thursday night in Week 1. Backyard Brawl is back. West Virginia is +7 against Pitt. Model has this thing at about Pitt -4 3/4 points, so we like West Virginia. There is value here. We like the Mountaineers +7 with an outside shot to pull the outright upset. Later in the weekend, we go to Saturday. Louisville. Wish we could have gotten this one earlier. We still feel very good about it. Louisville is -3.5 at Syracuse. We think it's a double-digit win for Louisville. I think it's going to be one of the squarest lines on the board. I don't think there's going to be much Syracuse action. I just think the number's that wrong. So we're not even hesitating. It crossed 3. We don't care. We're taking Louisville -3.5. We're going to the Great Pacific Northwest for our next bet. But we're taking a MAC team. Washington opens against Kent State. Kent State right now is catching 21.5 points. We are going to take Kent State +21.5 against Washington. That one's, I think, a 9:30. It's a 10:30 Eastern kickoff. I don't need you guys staying up to watch it if you don't want to. But we're taking Kent State +21.5. We've got it at about Washington -16.5. So we think there's a lot of value there. The last one I wanted to hit on. So far we got West Virginia +7, Louisville -3.5, Kent State +21.5. Let's go to Sunday night. It's a standalone game in Week 1. It's in the Superdome. It's LSU -3. It's still on 3 right now. We got LSU winning this thing by about 6.5 points. So the model leans heavily LSU. And I'll tell you what it really likes. It likes that LSU defensive front against Florida State's very iffy offensive line right now. And it likes the Bayou Bengals to open that thing with a win. So LSU -3, Kent State +21.5, Louisville -3.5, West Virginia +7. That's not it. Those are just the 4 I'm handing out right now. Let's quickly go to the Pac-12. Then we're going to give you playoff picks. And then we're finally going to get out of here. The Pac-12, interesting situation right now. because the Pac-12, no one knows the future of the conference. It's just that right now, we know Utah's good. We know USC's got a whole lot of newness. We've got Oregon, but we got a new staff out there at Oregon. I think to myself, is there really any point in looking at odds here? There's so much newness. I know they're out there. I'm looking at it, and everything starts from scratch for me. I like Utah, but I don't know what to expect from Oregon and USC. I'm going to give it my best shot here, though. So let's start with, they have divisions out here now, but the way they do the conference championship game is they just take the two best. So you got divisions, but we're not going to take division winners. So whatever. Let's get into it.
Quack, quack.
Let's go with Oregon. There is excellent energy with this new staff. I'm not going to deny that. There is a unique opportunity here to win right away. It's kind of like the Oklahoma of the West Coast. In fact, you could also classify USC as that, and I know how those two fan bases love to be compared to each other. Their defense is going to give them time to round into form. What form? I don't know. I don't know how much to trust Bo Nix at quarterback. I don't know how much to trust that young receiver core. There's some talent at receiver. It hasn't been fully realized yet. The offensive line's intact, though, so I think this could end up being a pretty good team. The JP poll starts them outside the top 25 because what you could be is not what you get rated on right now. It's what it thinks you will be in week one. So teams have risen in that thing every single year. Oregon could be one this year. They open against Georgia. Rest of the schedule is workable. Let's take a look at the best case. 11-1 is the best case. Because outside of that Georgia game, no one's going to outclass them. But they do eventually have a team that out-physicaled them. So best case 11-1, worst case 7-5. We got Oregon going 9-3. 9-3 is a very, very good year. 9-3 puts you in contention for everything you need to be in contention for. Next up.
USC.
USC is a tough team to figure out. Offensive talent puts them right in the conversation. And it's hard to wrap your head around how much new talent they added, because it's a brand new era. You're not used to seeing people able to do this. Can they handle the physicality of Utah is really just the question I keep coming back to. Can you outscore the teams that do have that physical edge on you? There aren't many of them. I said teams plural. If Utah has that edge on you, can you outscore them, or does it end up looking like Utah versus Oregon last year? That's what the Pac-12 will ultimately probably come down to this year. You see USC's schedule. They go to Utah 10-15. That October 15th date is one I have circled. It could be our first ever trip to the Pac-12. We'll see. But in the meantime, what does the model say about USC? Best case for the Trojans, 11-1. We think even in the best of times, there's a loss somewhere out there. The worst case, 5 losses, 7-5. But the prediction for USC this year, really good season, 9-3 in year one under Lincoln Riley. Boom.
Utah.
Yep, let's talk Utah. They have waited for this opportunity in Salt Lake City for a long time. Not only do they probably have the best collection of talent that they've had under Kyle Whittingham, Oregon is seeing a ton of transition. USC is seeing a ton of transition. The conference has an uncertain future. It's now. This is the time for Utah. They talk so much about what they would have been capable of last year. They clicked too late. If the playoff would have been expanded, forget all that. It's not expanded yet. Do it this year. This is Utah's time. Cam Rising is back at quarterback. He's also in the control room right now. Virtually their entire wide receiver room is back. They made good portal moves, I think, at linebacker to shore up some big NFL losses there. This is the time for them. What does the model think? Let's take a look. Best case for Utah in the Pac-12, and they open against Florida on the road. Best case is 12-0. There is a path where Utah goes undefeated this year. The worst case is 8-4. They're just too good to fall anywhere below that, I think. Our prediction for Utah this year is 11-1. And if Utah's 11-1, they're going to the Pac-12 championship game. And if they win that thing and they're 12-1, they've got a shot to be in the playoff because their schedule's good enough. So they got a shot to be in the playoff. All right, Colin, let's take a look at the overall picture here in the conference. I pause so Colin can have a clean endpoint here when he edits it. The Pac-12 picture, Oregon 9-3. Is it going to be good enough to get in the Pac-12 championship game if they're 9-3? Keep in mind, it's not just division winner against division winner. They're taking the two best teams regardless. And we think that USC and Utah are going to be the two teams that end up battling, even though they're in the same division, for the conference championship game, which would mean a rematch in the conference championship game. And just like last year, we think USC will fall once to Utah, and then Utah will turn the trick again in the Pac-12 championship game, and they'll pull a repeat of what they did against Oregon last year, and the Pac-12 will see Utah emerge as a 12-1 team right there in the thick of the playoff picture. We've used the teleprompter one time tonight. And do you know what the teleprompter says right now? It says, don't forget Notre Dame. See, it's tough when you do these conference breakdowns to remember they're not in one. Did you know Notre Dame's not in a conference? Most of you don't ever talk about that, I know. So let's just show very quickly. Let's go through Notre Dame's schedule. And Notre Dame, you know they open on the road against Ohio State. But after that, what do you know about them? Well, they've got a game in Las Vegas against Brigham Young. They got a game in Baltimore against Navy. They get Clemson at home, actually. I always get that one confused in my mind. They go to USC at the end of the year. Hey, we're lower on Notre Dame. Our model's lower on Notre Dame. AP's got them at 5. We've got them at 14. We still think they're a really good team. But what does the model think in terms of overall record projection? The over-under is 8.5 here. That's the win total. Over-under 8.5 in Vegas. What does the model think? For Notre Dame, believe it or not, even though the model makes them the 14th best team in the country to start the year, there is an 11-1 path that the model sees. That would basically mean go lose to Ohio State and run the table the rest of the way. The model says it's there. The model says it's possible. What is the worst case for Notre Dame? The model says 7-5 is worst case for Marcus Freeman and company. The most likely record, and our official prediction for Notre Dame this year, is 9-3. 9-3 is a good year. They're going to have a great recruiting class. 9-3, I would think, is going to have them upset a couple of times, along with the week 1 loss. They're going to be in a lot of one-possession games this year. I don't endorse their quarterback situation right now enough to where I'm ready to go higher than 9-3. So 9-3, I think, is a pretty good year for them. We got a lot of you watching live. This is probably going to be our most watched and listened to show that we've ever done around here. And then we'll probably break that record, hopefully. But a lot of you, here's how great our audience is. I open my DMs frequently, and someone's just in there. They're not asking for anything. They're just saying, what can I do to help the show? What can I do? What can I do? And here's what you can do. It's as simple as this. Like every one of these videos. Well, if they're good. If they suck, hit the thumbs down because we deserve it. But liking the videos, the most important thing you can do is subscribing to this channel and subscribing to the podcast feeds. And then going and taking your best friend's phone while they're not looking and doing it on their phone. And then go taking your mom's phone and doing it on her phone. They'll be fine. They don't have to pay for it. It's not like a reoccurring charge. Subscriptions are the name of the game for us. Also, sharing this show and telling your friends, because word of mouth is better than any marketing budget they could give us. We don't spend a dime to market the show because you do it for us. You like, you sub, you share, and follow on the social accounts. I'm told young Bradley's about to get us up on TikTok, and I stress young Bradley is going to. It's at Late Kick Josh, no matter where you're looking. You do those 4 things, you have done everything that you could ever do and then some to help us out. That's all we need. Like, sub, share, and then follow. That's it. The last thing I wanted to do for you tonight, kind of a grand finale, if you will, is I wanted to give you our playoff picks, and I wanted to give you our national championship. And so I'm going to do that to wrap the show. College football playoff picture. You've seen our conference winners. You've seen those matchups. Who emerges, though? The odds to win the national championship right now, in order, are Bama, Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson, and then, believe it or not, USC has the 5th best odds to win the national championship. Then A&M and Utah, Texas is in there, LSU at plus 5,000 if you want some value on Brian Kelly and company. Let's take a look at what we project our playoff field to look like. We've got Alabama as the best team in the country. We are going to have them winning the SEC and locking down the number 1 seed. We've got Ohio State locking down the Big Ten championship with 1 regular season loss. We got the Buckeyes at number 2. Utah, for the first time, we are going to put in the playoff. First time in several years the Pac-12 will have been represented. That is a 1-loss Pac-12 champion, the Utah Utes. And then I've got Michigan in the playoff despite not winning the Big Ten. And that's going to be a really interesting and dicey situation. I think they're going to be good enough. That would give us Bama versus Michigan and Ohio State versus Utah in the semifinals. Obviously, there's no skill in projecting this stuff this far down the road, but the way we would see that play out is a national championship rematch from a couple of years ago. Alabama versus Ohio State. That would be at SoFi Stadium in beautiful Inglewood, California, which just means we get to stay with Sam Batesh and eat sushi all week, which is all you can really ask for in life. And the prediction there is Alabama wins the national championship. Let me tell you something. Unless you've got a model out there that can predict injury, I'm going to assume that Bama team's going to be fully healthy. If they're fully healthy this year, there is not anyone in this country that's going to beat them with the belt on the line. Have no doubt about it. Alabama is the best team in the country. I think we will say that about them wire to wire, and I think come season's end, you'll look at it and say it's one of the best teams that Saban's ever had there. Alabama, your national champion, at least as of August. I'm very interested to see if I get agreement, by the way, in the control room. Speaking of the control room, as we wrap up here, I've got to get, hey, what did, yes, Jared, that's pretty much what I did. I was reading the live chat. I got a little Post-it note on my finger here as we wrap up. Do you have any idea what our staff just did? We had 270 elements in the show tonight, which is more than double what the previous record was. I gave the staff a grand total of, 10 hours to put the show together. I've been in local news and TV, and I don't think we ever had a show that was even fractionally as involved as the show that we just produced. And they pulled it off. Director Colin's been punching this thing for near 2 hours. It's easier to send a man to the moon than it is to do what they just did. But they did it. And so my hat's off to them. And I appreciate you guys for being tuned in. It's going to be a great year. This is your college football show, and we're happy that you've chosen to be here. Tell your family, tell your friends, tell everyone in between. And subscribe while you're at it. We will be back here Tuesday night, same time. Until then, for Director Colin, for Producer Jesse, for our entire production executive team, I'm Josh Pate. Have yourselves a great start to your week, and God bless.